Hello and greetings from New York. Today is Wednesday, the 13th of March, 2024. I'm here with a brief video podcast about a depressing subject, which is the astrology of the declaration of the emergency said to be about a virus spreading and a new disease called SARS-CoV-2. This was on March 13th, 2020. There was no one dead at the time this emergency was declared in the United States, said to have been killed by this new mystery virus and mystery disease. And so the first thing to remember is that at the time the emergency was declared, there actually was not an emergency. There was an expected, anticipated, potential, possible emergency that led immediately to the shutdown of the entire world. And Trump shutting down the United States on March 13th, 2020, facilitated that greatly. Up to that point, there may have been some claimed lockdowns in China. There may have been some, there was definitely lockdown going on in northern Italy, which we've covered extensively on Planet Waves FM, Chiron Return. I can link that article. I'm here today because the thing that I haven't covered really in all of this very much, except for one article, is the astrology of what was happening at the time. Since from March 3rd of 2020, I was so involved in the technical aspects of understanding the claim of a test for a virus called the polymerase chain reaction. And then from there, looking into what this test was primed with, meaning what did they find that they could use to find something else, because that's all the PCR does, is it finds something it already has, that I really did not cover the astrology very much. And normally on an issue like that in Planet Waves, I would be doing more of the astrology, maybe equally balancing, but there just was not time for that. This whole situation seemed so dire that I was watching the astrology carefully, but I focused my writing energy and the energy of my research team on understanding what was actually happening or said to be happening in all facets of news reporting. And we recently published a video about the early days of that, and I will link to March of 2020 in this one. All right, so this is the total chart, and as you can see, there's a lot of points. I haven't really added anything extra other than what my software adds. Usually, I'll add about 10 or 15 extra points. There's no need for that at this time in this chart, but charts are made of patterns. And so it's easier, especially if you're somewhat new at this, to look at the individual patterns. For me, that was one of the breakthroughs in my ability to read astrology. Was a guy named Dave Arner sat me down with some charts, and we picked out the aspect patterns in the charts. And in the national emergency chart, the most important aspect pattern is this conjunction of Saturn and Pluto. That is a conjunction that happens about every 37 years. The opposition acts a lot like the conjunction. The opposition happened in the 9/11 chart. So this is an interesting study in the quadrature alignments of Pluto and Saturn, which Rick Tarnas has written about considerably, and which I quote in the article Don't Look Back, which I'll link. So I'm going to link to Lombardi, and I'm going to link to Don't Look Back. So we've got, and then the month of March. So that's 3 items. And this is a kind of a violent conjunction of Saturn and Pluto. The one in the 60s, there was an opposition in the 60s associated with all the assassinations. Then there was a conjunction I think in 81 or so, associated with the neocon takeover, and then there was the opposition, which kind of came at the culmination of the neocon movement, which was 9/11. And then we're back to the conjunction in 2020. So it's Pluto and Saturn, and it was magnified by having Jupiter there. So it's quite rare to have all of these cycles, meaning the Pluto-Saturn cycle, properly said Saturn-Pluto, the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, and the Jupiter-Pluto cycle, all to go off at the same time. It looks like, wow, there's 3 planets there. What's the easiest way to do this? I can never quite get this right. There's 3 planets, but actually there's three separate planetary cycles turning over at the same time. And so all through 2019, even 2018, people were predicting that there was going to be some kind of 9/11-like event in early 2020. And the conjunction was exact on 1/12/20, the main conjunction, Saturn conjunct Pluto on 1/12/20. And this was a crucial time, which I cover in Don't Look Back, because there was the public relations rollout of the whole matter of the claim of a virus, a coordinated public relations rollout, documented copiously in my chronology. So now that's 4 things I'm gonna list. One is the chrono. One is Don't Look Back. One is March of 20, and one is Lombardi by Michael Bryant. Okay, so not only was that going on, but the whole pattern was square Eris. Eris, a relatively new discovery. Eris had only been part of astrology for... Eris is added to astrology around 2006. We had an ephemeris by 2006. It's named in the summer of 2007, and it's named for the goddess of chaos. And Chad Trujillo on that team, I spoke to him at the time of the naming, and he said, yeah, well, we named it for the goddess of chaos in a very, very chaotic time. So I thought, okay, that makes sense. And so what we get is a 3 cycles going over at the same time: Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, all to one another, and then the whole thing hits the second jackpot at 90 degrees to Eris. That is a lot of tension. It is a lot of provocation. The thing about squares is they contain energy that wants to be expressed in some way. And the duality of a square is that internal tension versus that internal tension versus that internal tension, and then that one, and then that one. It's not the duality of a tennis match where there's one player on one side of the net and another player on the other side of the net, and they ping-pong the ball back and forth, and somebody wins and somebody loses. The square holds the tension internally, whether it's for a society or for an individual or for a situation, and that tension can become so unbearable that it needs to go somewhere. So it contains a huge amount of energy. And so that was the well-known, if you go back and read astrology blogs, people will talk about the COVID aspect, meaning either Saturn conjunct Pluto or Saturn conjunct Pluto square Eris. And that is this pattern. However, there was another important pattern going on in the background that was less likely to be noticed because fewer people understand Chiron, and even fewer people understand the second centaur, Pholus. Now, the centaurs are not asteroids. No offense to asteroids. They can be very important. But asteroids tend to be topical. They tend to orbit quickly. They have less influence than centaurs, which have long orbits, can be 51 years in the case of Chiron, 175 years, I think, in the case of Pholus, in the case of Nessus, 160 years or some crazy long orbit like that. So there was a second pattern in the chart, and the pattern involved Chiron. And the reason that Chiron is so important in this situation is because it was a healing crisis. We were said to be confronted with a disease. As soon as you hear something like that, you want to start looking at Chiron, because Chiron is about healing process. Chiron was the first doctor, first teacher of medicine. Chiron was taught medicine by his stepfather, Apollo, and then teaches medicine to the god of medicine, Asclepius. So Chiron is high up in the totem pole of medicine. And what was going on at the time that emergency was declared, and at the outset of this whole thing and the crisis, the shutdown of the world, was Chiron was square the lunar nodes. The lunar nodes, I'll put in purple since that's the pencil that I've got. The lunar nodes exist in every chart, and they one of their functions is they tell you where eclipses are going to happen. But they are a thing of themselves. They are kind of like an energy pattern running, like a wind tunnel running through the chart. I mean, they're that powerful. You think, how can a thing with no mass that's only predictive of a future event, an eclipse, be that powerful? But they are. And it turns out that when you put anything square the nodes, 90-degree angle, you have one of the most influential configurations in all of astrology. So remember that. And if you're going to pose a question to your chart, one question might be, what do I have square the nodes? What does that say about my life? And in the case of this chart, we had Chiron square the nodes. And not only was Chiron square the nodes, it was also square Pholus. I'm having a hard time with this today. Square Pholus on the south node, right there. That little glyph with a green glyph. And the thing about, and look at the precision of that. Everything is lined up exactly in the 5th degree. If it has 4 plus anything, it's in the 5th degree. We've got Chiron square the nodes to 3 arc minutes, and we've got Chiron square Pholus to 1/4 of a degree. So this is as exact as it gets, unless of course we're talking about the April 8th eclipse, where we have Chiron, sun and moon exact to the arc minute. That's very, very rare to have that kind of pressure. But we do have this, and the reason I dwell on this is because Pholus, speaking of pressure, Pholus releases pressure. Whenever Pholus is active in the chart, meaning taking aspects, Pholus delivers externalized pressure. It outgasses. It's like opening up a helium tank and all the gas goes out, or dropping Mentos in a bottle of Pepsi, or pushing the button on the shaving cream can and all the shaving cream comes out. You can't put it back in. And so Pholus can start what seems like a nonstop reaction. It is very reactionary compared to Chiron, which is not very reactionary. Chiron wants to take things slowly. But Chiron is square the nodes and it's square Pholus. And so there is that possibility, which happened, that the pressure is all going to come out at once, which it did. Now, the Chiron Pholus square happens about 7 times, and it was brewing all through 2019, and there's only a couple of iterations left in 2020. So I think out of the 7, maybe there were going to be 2 in 2020. So it was almost over. And I saw that in February, and I was thinking, well, maybe this will be short-lived, because the momentum seems to be driven by the square of Chiron and Pholus. That's not going to last very long. Of course, Saturn-Pluto was a one-time event. Jupiter-Pluto was a one-time event. Jupiter-Saturn was a one-time event. But all of it, with no retrograde involved, but all of those one-time events added up to a lot of momentum. A lot of momentum. And that's what we got. That's what we were living with. And there's a very important article to be written in how in March of 2020 we went from life as usual to 4.4 billion people being locked out of their businesses, colleges, campuses, schools, businesses, corporate offices, everything basically but like newspapers and hospitals in 3 weeks. 4.4 billion people placed under some form of lockout, lockdown, stay-at-home order, or house arrest for you would think that the bodies were piling up in the streets. They were not. And this is a very important thing to remember, was that the snow emergency had been declared before there was even a snowflake. And so there was a lot of expectation built up. And of course, with aspects like that, you're going to see that. Now, one last point about Chiron before I move on. When something is square the nodes, or technically called at the bending, that is the thing that everything hinges upon. And Chiron represents attitudes and values toward healing and the healing process. And so we had a warning at the time this emergency was declared on March 13th, 2020, just 4 years ago, that everything was going to hinge on our attitudes and values towards healing. And particularly in the case of Chiron, we're talking about holistic healing, not conventional medicine necessarily, but Chiron represents the holistic principle. And my naive thought at the time was, well, this will be a great opportunity for the holistic healing community. We've got this supposed problem, and the idea that you could do anything medically for a virus is very new, right? The mythology of viruses is you never get rid of it, and you can never cure it, and there's no medicine for it, and nothing to prevent it, and so on. Well, that makes it ripe for homeopathy, which is the very go-to method whenever there's not a solution, whenever there's not a ready-made answer, an operation or a pill that you can take. And so everything hinged on this test of holistic medicine and the idea of holistic thinking. And to my mind, 95% of the holistic practitioners betrayed their training, their knowledge, their educations, their commitment to doing no harm, their understanding that conventional medicine doesn't really work very well and it causes more problems than it solves. So it is these two patterns. It is the pattern of the Saturn-Pluto-Jupiter Eris pattern. And by the way, the Pluto-Eris square goes on all through 2020 and into 2021 because the two move so slowly that they're just constantly retrograding into the square, over into and out of the square, staying within a degree or two over and over again. And so that Pluto-Eris square, that deep, that deep, shadowy, let's not deal with the quality of Pluto, and the crazy-making quality of Eris, particularly when not invited into the conversation, I think are astrologically what provided the momentum to drive this all through 2020 and into 2021. And by the end of 2020, by any metric, there was absolutely nothing going on except the vaccine was coming, and they had to drive the illusion of a crisis well into they drove the illusion of the crisis right up to the end of the year, even when the test had been debunked by peer review and so forth, and they roll out the vaccine in December of 2020. I mean, and it was so ridiculous that here in New York, just to give the illusion that he was doing something, then Governor Andrew Cuomo closed workout gyms at night so people wouldn't be contagious. They wouldn't give each other the disease. At night, like you had to be out of the gym by 10 o'clock. Well, even in New York City, particularly in 2020, who the hell is in the gym at 10 o'clock at night? But it looked dramatic. Oh my God, we're closing restaurants and bars and gyms at 10 o'clock. And look, why we all fell for this was because such drama and hype had been shoved at us. And the full power of the mass media in all of its hypnotic majesty was pounded into us. Now, so far I've been talking about aspects that are only, a degree apart, really very, very tight aspects. There's more to the picture, but I want to keep this brief today. And you just keep noticing in these charts things. So this is the whole chart. You can see the two different patterns I talked about, the Chiron Pholus pattern here, and then the Pluto Eris pattern here. What we have up at the top of the chart, and you can see it better in Koch houses. I have equal houses set from a reading last night, but this actually moves into the 10th house, and it is to 10th place because it's in Taurus. And this is the disruption of the government and the economy. Venus conjunct Uranus, right on the government angle, right on the 10th house. That's 10 degrees, not the 10th house. This here is the 10th house. And so this is the disruption factor. Also interesting that Uranus is at 4 degrees and change, and it trines the lunar nodes, opening up another kind of portal into chaos. This chart did include the midheaven, so I want to just show you what that looks like. The midheaven is actually there, and that's Uranus and Venus, which show the disruptive power of government and the fact that there's going to be an economic disruption. Now, one last thought. With Leo rising, Pisces is house number 8. And that's about death. Death, dowry, and the substance of the bride in classical astrology. And here we have a Sun-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. Not only that, it's not one of those exact onto the pin, but these count, especially with the Sun and Neptune having the widest orbs of all the planet, and Nessus being about the consequences. And so this is all going on in the 8th house, where it is death, but dowry, meaning the conveyance of capital, the movement of money in very large amounts. It was the biggest movement of money in world history because there's never been more money, and there was never a reason to move more of it. And if you look at my chronology, there's a thread through the chronology written by Fabio Vigi, a professor in Italy, who covered the concealed 2019 economic meltdown that was going on. And if you remember the talk during like the Great Recession crisis of when was this? 2008. There was talk of a bank holiday. They were going to close the banks and the economy for a day to cool things off. Well, what we thought was the COVID virus lockdown was a bank holiday of grand proportion, lasting many months, that was used to slow down the economy and at the same time to move trillions of dollars and recapitalize the economy, that had nothing to do with a virus, because this was all being planned long before there was any notion of a thing called SARS-CoV-2 or or COVID disease or anything like that. That's all supposed to have been sprung on us by surprise in December and January. And so any specific plans ahead of that to do anything that was done in 2020 count as premeditation. They count as planning, i.e., the fix. So I have much more to say about this chart, but I've gone on now for about 25, 26 minutes. That is quite enough. I'm going to post this on to Substack and YouTube and various places like that. A place to comment to get my attention is on Substack, and I'm happy to discuss this chart at further length. Happy 4th anniversary of the declaration of the emergency. 4 years is a long time. 4 years is the time it takes to get a college degree. But the academic semester is only about 14 weeks. So by now we should have a BA and a master's degree in not being fooled. And I'll leave it there. Thank you for tuning in. Lots of love. And bye.